Right now on Law and Crime Report, as protests continue in Portland, the outcry against federal intervention reaching a fever pitch. Video showing the mayor of Portland being tear-gassed alongside protesters. Plus, in the case of Ghislaine Maxwell, a federal judge says a trove of secret documents under seal must now be made public. The documents stem from a 2015 case brought by an alleged victim of Jeffrey Epstein. What's in them? We discuss.
She is a monster. She's worse than Epstein.
And later, the president's former personal attorney is yet again freed from prison, why a federal judge says Michael Cohen was a victim of retaliation. Law and Crime Report diving into true crime and all the legal stories making headlines. It's Friday, July 24th, 2020.
And thanks so much for joining us today on Law and Crime Report. I'm Stacey Delikat. We have a packed show for you today. Lots to get to. I have two wonderful guests joining me this hour. And we're going to start in Portland, Oregon, where federal law enforcement and protesters have been locked in a tense standoff for days. Now, protests in Portland started more than 55 days ago, and those protests were over the use of police brutality. They were demanding racial justice, police accountability. But things in Portland, Oregon took a turn around July 4th when President Trump sent in federal agents to try to quell some of the unrest there. Well, it all came to a head on Wednesday night when Portland's Mayor Ted Wheeler was tear-gassed himself. Let's take a look at footage from that night. So I want to bring in my two guests to discuss what has been going on in Portland these last few days and nights. We have Judge Brandon Birmingham with us from Dallas, Texas today, as well as Law and Crime's own analyst, Terri Austin, trial attorney. Thank you both so much for being with me this afternoon to discuss these topics. Judge Birmingham, I want to start with you. You know, the federal agents here, I mean, we know they're in their right to come in and protect federal buildings. But when we've seen tear gas, rubber bullets being shot into crowds, heard reports of people being taken by federal agents into unmarked cars, are those agents going too far? Are they stepping beyond their rights?
Well, there is a extreme public outrage, I think, from all across the country because of the perception that they are indeed going too far. As far as the people that are being taken off the streets, it depends on who the person is and why they're being taken off the street. And there has to be transparency in law enforcement. There's got to be a good reason why they have used the force that they used on the mayor the other night. And if there's not, then that is a real problem. And right now, I think one of the things that this nation is wrestling with is how are we going to deal with the interplay between law enforcement and the public. And things like this are causing great distrust in our society.
We know that the Justice Department's Inspector General, his counterpart at the Department of Homeland Security, now say they're going to review the actions of federal agents after complaints and requests by lawmakers in Portland. Terri, I want to hear your thoughts on this. Is an investigation, first of all, warranted? And what are sort of the conflicts of interest here when we have federal government now investigating federal agents?
This is absolutely positively an opportunity to investigate because there are conflicting interests here, although in my opinion, there was excessive use of force. So what Trump is arguing and his administration will be arguing is that they had the right to go in either under the Patriot Act or the Insurrection Act. And opposing that is the fact that under the Insurrection Act, no one asked for his help. And he had said recently that he would wait until his help was asked for, and it wasn't. And under the Patriot Act, we have a right. This isn't terrorism. People have a right to demonstrate. There is a First Amendment right of free speech. So going in the way that Trump and the administration went in here with this use of force when no one asked for it, and when these individuals have a right to protest, and using tear gas is absolutely unnecessary, and we definitely should be investigating it.
Let's go ahead and look at a little bit more video from these protests from federal agents using force on the protesters.
What are you doing? Use your words. What are you doing?
I haven't done anything wrong.
Use your words.
What's going on, sir? I'm asking.
What is going on?
We need to know.
Who are you?
Why are you taking?
NLG will get you out. What's your name? Tell us your name.
What's your name?
Okay, you're fine. We'll get you out.
Bro, what?
We got you, friend.
We got you.
Oh, fuck.
NLG.
You just violated their rights.
Oh. Kidnapping people.
You just violated their rights.
Thanks for keeping the fucking. Oh.
Well, certainly those clips are disturbing to see those protesters being taken away, or we saw the first protester being hit with what appeared to be a baton. It wasn't clear what he was doing to warrant that, although these are selective clips. They're not telling us the whole story. But based on what we're seeing here, Judge Birmingham, what is your reaction to those scenes?
Well, as far as the arrest goes, I sure hope that they have a good reason why they're arresting him, because it appears as though he wasn't doing anything wrong. Maybe they know exactly who he is, and there better be a good lawful reason for his arrest. The shot of the young man who was in the Navy, he is a veteran from our Navy. And, I would suggest to you that whenever an officer is using force, that there has to be a reason for him to use force. And if you look at that video, maybe there was something that happened before, but at the instant in time that the force was being used, I don't really see what was the reason that the force was being used.
Terri, do you agree? I mean, certainly, I think most observers would be pretty disturbed by that video. Is it proof that the federal agents are, out of their rights? They're going too far.
Well, I absolutely agree. And here's the issue. These agents haven't been identified. Are they the military? Are they National Guard, which is what you would send under the Insurrection Act? Or are they Homeland Security agents, which is what you would send if it were under the Patriot Act? So these individuals have a right to know who is perpetrating the arrest and where it is they are being taken and why they are being taken away. It is very frightening when these unmarked cars come up, and it's very difficult to identify who the arresting officers are.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There are a lot of questions. It's suspicious, almost like a movie, right? I mean, and it looks like a war zone when we look at that footage. But to see these uniformed agents with the gas mask, with their weapons up, taking people away, it's certainly very disturbing and really seems like a scene out of a movie. Another development in the last 24 hours is that a federal judge specifically blocked U.S. agents from arresting or using force, physical force against journalists and legal observers who are watching these protests happen. That is a good first step forward, I suppose, but is that enough, Judge Birmingham?
Well, I just hope that throughout the life of these cases, after, at some point in the future, the man who was arrested is going to have his day in court. And what I'm very hopeful for is that those days in court are made public, that the public has access to those court proceedings so we can see exactly why. We talked a little bit before about oversight and accountability. There has to be oversight and accountability in all of these cases so that the public's trust, if it has been eroded, may be able to be restored.
At this point, Terri, can the public's trust be restored when things have reached this level of almost chaos there? I mean, it's going to take a while, I would think.
Well, I think it can be restored, but I think the more important issue here is this is a democracy. And the way that the administration is sending troops in without being asked and using this excessive force, it's almost like it is anarchy, and he is trying to be a dictator and controlling the public. So I think we can get the public trust. To Judge Birmingham's point, I think if we see what happened to the people who are arrested and they are, making sure that they are safe and that they get out and that their rights aren't being violated, their constitutional rights. I think if we see that, then the public, trust can then be restored.
The state of Oregon has sought an order limiting the federal agents' arrest powers during the demonstrations beyond just being able to arrest journalists or legal observers, the protests in general. Judge Birmingham, how do you see that playing out? Do you see a judge granting that order?
Well, I would think that the only reason why somebody can be arrested is if there is a lawful warrant that's signed by a judge or because a felony was being committed within their presence. And that's the test. And if there wasn't, then the person should not be arrested. That goes whether you're in Portland or whether you're in Dallas, whether you're protesting or not. You've got to be able to have a valid, lawful reason for each and every arrest. And if you don't, then you have some real problems.
Well, certainly this is something we're going to be keeping an eye on because it does not appear that those protests are going to be dissipating anytime soon. We're going to take a quick break, though. When we come back, lots more to talk about today, including a trove of secret documents in the Ghislaine Maxwell case relating to Jeffrey Epstein. Yesterday, a judge ruled that those documents can be made public. So when will we see them? What do they say? We're going to talk about it right after the break. Welcome back. Ghislaine Maxwell, she is Jeffrey Epstein's lover and alleged co-conspirator in the big case against him, sexual abuse case involving minors and a number of young women. Well, she's been behind bars in a federal prison for her role in allegedly recruiting young women for Jeffrey Epstein since July 2nd. Well, now a judge has ruled that a set of documents, apparently a trove of top secret documents relating to a civil case filed against Maxwell in 2015 by one of Epstein's accusers, Virginia Giuffre, can be released and made public. The court found that any minor embarrassment or annoyance resulting from the disclosure of Ghislaine Maxwell's non-testimony during that civil case, the public has a right to know. The judge ruled it's more important for the public to know than to protect what is in those documents. Now, again, this relates to a civil case stemming from 2015, a civil case in which Virginia Giuffre, one of Jeffrey Epstein's most vocal alleged victims, came forward suing Ghislaine Maxwell for defamation because Ghislaine Maxwell called Giuffre a liar. Just to give you a little refresher on some of Giuffre's allegations, let's listen to a bit of an interview she did.
And I asked her, I said, why are you having all these girls come in and sleep with your boyfriend? And she was like, so I don't have to do it all the time. You know, so she made like a joke out of it.
Why do you think she did it?
She did it to keep Jeffrey happy, for sure. She did it because she loves the control over people. Jeffrey was a sick pedophile, but she was the mastermind.
So that was Virginia Giuffre in a previous interview. Now, this extensive collection of what's being called extremely personal documents relating to the civil case that Giuffre filed against Maxwell had been under seal, but there had been requests to unseal these documents in light of the new charges against Ghislaine Maxwell. And as I said yesterday, the judge ruled that the documents could be unsealed, but not so fast. We won't be seeing what's in them just yet. That is because Maxwell's attorneys asked for the court to put a stay on the release of those documents until they could appeal her decision. The judge gave them a week to appeal this decision to unseal the documents. So once again, I have my two wonderful guests joining me this afternoon. Terri Austin, Law&crime analyst and trial attorney, and Judge Brandon Birmingham out of Dallas, Texas today. So Terri, let me start with you. Were you surprised at all by this ruling that the judge said these documents can be made public?
Well, I do think it was a reasonable response. What she's weighing is the probative versus the prejudicial value of having these documents come into trial. And the documents have something to do with the allegations. So I think it was probably the right decision. The one thing the judge did say, however, is that if there is personally identifiable information as it relates to anyone, frankly, but as it relates to the defendant, Maxwell. And also she said that the names of the Jane Does cannot be revealed. But other than that, she said that these documents can come into the case.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. We know when and if the documents do end up being unsealed, there will be a lot of redactions. So a lot of people saw this headline and thought, wow, will there be names in here? Will we know who else was perhaps tied to Jeffrey Epstein's alleged the sex rings he's been alleged to run? Will we see some more high profile names, perhaps, of other men that were involved? Unclear, because there will be redactions. But Judge Birmingham, let me ask you, the judge, Loretta Preska, a federal judge, said the court finds the countervailing interest identified identified failed to rebut the presumption of public access, and accordingly, those papers shall be unsealed. If you're the judge in that case, do you agree? Do you make the same move?
Well, I do want to just underlie the connection between what we're talking about now and what we were just talking about transparency in the process. There is a presumption that what happens in a court should be public. And the only reason to keep something not from being public is because it might interfere with an investigation or there's one of the other factors there. So the presumption is everything should be public. I really do think it's a good idea in our court system that things be as transparent and as accessible as possible. For the same reason, we should have cameras in the courtroom filming these trials, all the way to releasing information that won't affect anybody's rights in a particular case. I do support and think it's a good idea to have these types of records released and accessible to the public.
No surprise here that Maxwell's attorneys are appealing this decision. They had asked for 2 weeks to file their appeal, given the new criminal case, but Judge Preska said they could have 1 week to file the appeal motion. In the meantime, she asked attorneys to get the documents ready for release either way. Hard to predict how an appeals court could rule, but Terri, what is your sense? Is it possible that the appeals judge will say, hold on, let's keep these documents secret?
It's possible, but I don't think it's probable. I think that the documents will ultimately be certainly released as far as the court proceedings are concerned, and ultimately, I think, released as far as the public is concerned. I think, like the judge said, there is a great argument for transparency here. And again, this is a democracy, and making sure that there is a trial, it's a fair trial, that it's impartial, that it's subject to the public viewing. I think all of that makes complete sense. So I don't think that the decision is going to be reversed in any way.
This is such a high-profile case now. You have Jeffrey Epstein, you have Ghislaine Maxwell, two super powerful, wealthy people. We know that, obviously, everything about Jeffrey Epstein, his suicide, huge headlines, big story, and then we had the release of this Netflix series, right, about the case, which everyone was talking about. This is something that is so much, I think, in the public dialogue, splashed across the pages of tabloids even. How much do you think the public interest in general in this case, perhaps drummed up by the Netflix series, drummed up by what's, posted in magazine articles, tabloids, so forth, sort of influences the judge's decision? Obviously, the judge is not supposed to be influenced by that, but the fact that there is so much interest, perhaps because of the way this story has been portrayed, does that play a part in this at all, Judge?
Well, when you're trying to make decisions in high-profile cases like this, you have to be aware and cognizant of how any publicity might impact the rights of the people who were involved directly in the case. And if you can do that, then you're doing a very good thing. And the law will not tolerate a judge being influenced by public opinion, the court of public opinion, and things like that. You can't do that. You got to be mindful of it. You can't ignore it. You will have to confront it. Like, for example, during jury selection, a lot of the jurors may have formed opinions, so you have to be cognizant of it so that you can make sure that all of the rights of the people involved, no matter what they're charged with, are adhered to and they are given their full due process.
Absolutely. Well, another big headline related to the Epstein-Maxwell story this week, actually coming out of the White House, when during a press conference, President Trump was asked what he thought about Maxwell's arrest and the federal charges she is now facing. Let's take a listen to his response.
Criticize Bill Clinton's behavior. I'm wondering, do you feel that she's going to turn in powerful men? How do you see that working out?
I don't know. I haven't really been following it too much. I just wish her well, frankly. I've met her numerous times over the years, especially since I lived in Palm Beach, and I guess they lived in Palm Beach. But I wish her well, whatever it is. I don't know the situation with Prince Andrew. Just don't know. Not aware of it.
Ghislaine Maxwell is in prison, and a lot of people want to know if she's going to turn in powerful people. And I know you've talked in the past about Prince Andrew, and you've criticized Bill Clinton's behavior. I'm wondering, do you feel that she's going to turn in powerful men? How do you see that working out?
I don't know. I haven't really been following it too much. I just wish her well, frankly. I've met her numerous times over the years, especially since I lived in Palm Beach, and I guess they lived in Palm Beach. But I wish her well, whatever it is. I don't know the situation with Prince Andrew. Just don't know. Not aware of it.
Not a great look there. The president said he wishes her well twice. Terry, when you heard this, what was your reaction? Obviously, it sparked immense chatter on social media in general, on the cable shows. President Trump saying he wishes Ghislaine Maxwell well.
Listen, his credibility is always at issue here, and wishing her well was definitely not a good look. This is someone who's been arrested for heinous crimes against underage girls. So to say I wish her well, obviously every defendant has a right to be, innocent until proven guilty. But to say I wish her well, I think wasn't the right response. He should have been ready for that question. And frankly, to say that he isn't familiar with the situation, it leads me to believe that he's not either telling the truth or that he just doesn't want to comment, and that's his standard statement. So everyone knows about these cases. For him to not be aware of it just doesn't seem credible to me.
Yeah, I mean, of course, everyone is innocent until proven guilty, but I think a lot of people felt that that was not the right way to go on the statement. Judge, you care to respond?
Well, I think we're going to see how wise or unwise those statements were when we see and uncover in a court of law exactly what she has been proven to have done. And once we know that, well, then we'll be able to, that'll speak volumes about whether the president should or should not have said the things that he said in the press conference.
Well, everyone is going to be watching closely in terms of what happens with these documents, I think, and what is contained in the documents. Again, the judge basically giving Maxwell's team a week to file an appeal, but asked lawyers to still prepare the documents to be released. So it is possible, if the appeal court does rule to go ahead and let those documents be released, that we could be seeing them in the coming weeks. Lots of interest for sure. We're going to take another quick break. Much more to go here on the Law and Crime Report today. Stay with us. Welcome back to Law and Crime Report. We turn now to Michael Cohen, President Trump's former personal attorney. Michael Cohen was sentenced to 3 years behind bars after pleading guilty to charges of campaign finance violation, among other charges. He was serving out his sentence in Otisville, New York, when in May he was released on furlough because of coronavirus fears. Well, on July 9th, he was sent back to prison. It was allegedly because he had been working on a book, a tell-all book about President Trump. And Michael Cohen sued, asking to be released. Well, a judge ordered that his jailing was completely retaliatory. In fact, I want to read you what the judge said. He said, in his 21 years of being a judge and sentencing people and looking at terms and conditions of supervised release, he has never seen such a clause. That's Judge Alvin Hellerstein, referring to a clause that Cohen be allowed to remain at home but sign a document that would have barred him from publishing a book during the rest of his sentence. Judge Brandon Birmingham joining us from Dallas, Texas. Let me start with you here. I mean, do you agree? Have you heard of a clause like this allowing someone to be released from prison on furlough, but saying a condition is, but you can't work on any kind of book that has to do with the president or anything else for that matter while you're out?
It is a peculiar type of condition, to be sure, but it's also somewhat related to the sentence as well. And that's really the test. Is there a condition of release that is related somehow to the case that would keep the public safety at top of mind, and or not allow somebody, I mean, let's just take it like this. The man was put into prison, okay? That is a punishment. And there's a feeling, I think, in this country right now that there are the haves and the have-nots in our criminal justice system. And there's a lot of people who are very critical of release in the very first place of him, because it's perceived that he is released because of his ties to the president for no other reason, that the law applies differently to those that are connected. And I think that is really a major problem that we need to tackle in this country.
You know, it's interesting because I think that may be a perception for some, but others would argue President Trump, you know, does not want to protect Michael Cohen anymore. Michael Cohen turned on his former boss majorly and is now working on this book, Disloyal, the tell-all about, you know, what he says is President Trump acting like a racist and an anti-Semite behind closed doors. So while, yes, he's certainly connected, certainly represents that other half, I don't know, you know, whether his connections to President Trump actually helped him be furloughed. I mean, what do you think, Terry?
Well, look, I think these concepts of making sure the law is equally applied and the concept of making sure people have a First Amendment right to say whatever they want, I believe cannot, those two concepts can be stated together and work together. So, for instance, Michael Cohen, if he gets out, okay, but other people should be able to get out of jail too because of COVID-19, and not just because they are high profile or because they have money, but because they might be sick. And so that rule should apply to everyone equally. I do agree with the judge's ruling here, though, that from a First Amendment perspective, if you are going to say he has to stay in jail unless he doesn't publish a book, I don't think that's the reason. He should stay in jail because, like everyone else, they're all in jail. Or he should stay in jail because he's a flight risk. Or he should stay in jail because he's going to commit another crime. I don't believe the reason that was purported here, the fact that he can't publish, that's not a reason to keep him in jail. So I think it was the right decision. But I agree with Judge Birmingham. These decisions have to be evenly applied to all defendants.
Yeah, I mean, the judge in this case, Judge Hellerstein, says that the reason he was sent back to jail to begin with was retaliation by the federal government, because perhaps the government was quite angry, the government, President Trump, his administration, that he was working on this tell-all book. Obviously, if that was the case, that would be retaliation. But do you think that there could have been orders from that high up, Judge Birmingham, saying, let's bring him back, we got to put him back in prison?
Well, I certainly hope not. I mean, I really do. I really choose to believe that we live in a country that is not so crooked, basically, and not so top heavy. But, if there is those orders that were handed down, well, then we need to deal with that. And that's one of the reasons why people are protesting now. I think that's one of the reasons why we have such unrest, is there's such dissatisfaction with the courts. There's such a belief, whether it's political connection or whether it's because of access to resources, that people are treated differently. And that's the problem. Should he be in jail or should he not? That decision was made based on the crime that he was convicted of and the appropriate sentencing at the time of the sentencing. That's really what you need to be focused on when you're determining what a sentence should be. If things come in afterwards that impact that are crooked or unlawful, well, then that shouldn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you completely. Well, Mr. Cohen now will be released again, I believe later this afternoon. He'll be fitted with an ankle braces. He will be on home detention to serve out the rest of his sentence, and we'll see what happens with the publication of that book, supposedly supposed to come out 2 months before the November election. Stay tuned on that one. Well, let's switch gears and talk about George Floyd's murders. The George Floyd's murder, rather. The police officer behind bars charged with killing Floyd is now being accused of tax fraud, of tax evasion. Derek Chauvin and his wife apparently did not file their state tax returns for 3 years and also failed to properly report their income for a number of years. So now they are facing additional charges completely unrelated to those charges, murder charges involving George Floyd, but nonetheless, other charges that are not a great look here. Terri, what did you make of this when you saw this headline and heard that this couple was now being accused of tax evasion?
Well, the first thing I thought is, when it rains, it pours. I guess they went in, they saw his computer, they realized that, it wasn't just the fact that this man is a police officer and, murdered somebody, that in addition to that, and obviously I'm not making light of it, that is the most serious charge that you could possibly have against you. But now he has these other charges, which are quite serious as well. 9 counts. I think they're 5 years apiece in terms of penalty. That's a lot of years, 45 years. And if in fact he's convicted of that as well, he has a lot of problems down the line. So I think that it's interesting. They went in, they found this, and they brought it, it looks like they are going to bring these, they have brought these charges against him, and he's got a lot to deal with right now.
Yeah, I mean, no question about it. As you said, when it rains, it pours. Totally unrelated charges, but serious charges nonetheless, although not nearly on the level of those charges involving Judge Floyd. One thing I thought was interesting was that Derek Chauvin and his wife were actually recorded on a prison phone call talking about these charges, his wife making reference to people digging into their tax information. They have to know those calls are being recorded. And Judge Birmingham, I mean, was that a mistake for them to discuss this on a phone call from Chauvin's prison jail?
Well, if it was a mistake, it's a mistake that is made so frequently. I can't even tell you the number of times that people make statements like that on recorded jail calls. They're told at the beginning that their calls are being recorded. And those types of phone calls come into trials that I've presided over and that I used to prosecute when I was a prosecutor. Almost every single time that there was a trial, there was some statement that's made. Is it a mistake? Well, it certainly doesn't help his defense in the tax evasion case, I'll tell you that.
Do you think, I mean, granted, completely different charges here, not nearly on the same level, but, when it comes to the criminal case involving the charges, the murder charges involving George Floyd, I mean, do these now tax evasion charges play any role whatsoever? Could they be brought into that case, or are we just totally talking apples and oranges, Judge?
It sounds like apples and oranges. Tax evasion is one thing. I don't know that there's a connection between tax evasion and the conduct that we saw for those horrific 8 minutes and 46 seconds on the street in Minneapolis. Where it may come into play, though, is in assessing punishment. And in Texas, for example, in a lot of jurisdictions like Texas, Minnesota might be one of them, a person's life is admissible essentially in the punishment phase of a case so that jurors can use anything relevant. And certainly, in addition to the crime that he's been convicted of, any other felonies that he's been accused of or has committed or that the state can prove he's committed is going to weigh in on the appropriate sentence.
Terri, a quick question before we go. I mean, this certainly leads to the appearance that he thinks that he's just above the law, whether it's filing taxes or arresting a man and putting his knee on his neck. Do you agree?
I absolutely agree. It definitely shows his character, Stacey. The thing is, when you saw him with his knee on George Floyd's neck, he looked as though he could care less. He could do anything he wanted. He totally ignored what the other police officers were saying. And now you see he didn't even bother to file taxes, knowing that there's an obligation in the state to do that. So he does act as though he is above the law. It shows what his character is really about.
Yeah, well, another case we are going to be following closely in the coming weeks and months. We're going to take another quick break. When we come back, new developments in the Breonna Taylor case, and we'll talk about a man who spent 20 years behind bars for a murder he says he did not commit. He walked free. We'll show you the footage. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now to the case of Breonna Taylor, tragically murdered in her own home by police. CNN is out with a new analysis in which they say there were a series of missteps by police officers that led up to this wrongful death. This case obviously has generated attention and calls for justice from around the country, really around the world. CNN's review found that there was a key miscalculation by police. They assumed Breonna Taylor was home alone, but actually her boyfriend was there and he was legally armed. They also say there were just some bad decisions made on the night of her death. I mean, not entirely surprising. A woman with a promising future, EMT, wound up dead, who was not supposed to even, have been involved in this. Let me start with you, Terri. What are your feelings on the findings of this new CNN analysis?
Well, CNN took a look at the affidavits. They took a look at all of the interviews. And based on the information, they found that there were some pieces of information that the police were using that weren't accurate. To your point, you said that they thought she was there alone. They also thought that her house was being used to deal drugs. They also thought that she was still with her ex-boyfriend, Glover, who actually was arrested that evening. So here they go into this house, ramming into the door, thinking that it's a, drug house, and it was not. So the premises of going there, the underlying thoughts that the police had were all wrong, and they charged this house as though, there were weapons and guns and drugs. And in fact, it was, as you say, Breonna Taylor, who is an EMT, and her new boyfriend is there. They're asleep and they're in their home. They have a right to defend themselves. So it was a horrible situation.
Before I bring Judge Birmingham in on this, let's listen to a clip from a police interview. Sergeant Jonathan Mattingly of the Louisville Metro Police.
At that point, Lieutenant Hoover said, "Go ahead and hit it." So I looked at Mike and said, "Go ahead." So he hits the first time, and it hits right on the door handle and didn't move the door. And every time he hits, people are announcing, "Please search warrant, please search warrant." Second time he hits the good spot, and it almost knocks the door open. I could see the deadbolt at an angle, and I could see a crack in the door leading into the apartment. So I said, this one's going to go. So he hit the third time, and as soon as he hit, the door came open. They're yelling, "Please search warrant! Please search warrant!" I go to round the corner. I clear the living room on the right-hand side where you can see the sliding glass door. As I turn the corner, as soon as I cleared the threshold of the front door, I could see down the hallway. My mind your mind works so quick in this situation, it's unreal. Because as soon as I cleared it, I'm face on about probably 20 feet away, right down the hallway. There's a bedroom door on the right, and there's the male and a female. The male's closest to the door, so it's to my right. And as I turn the doorway, he's in a stretched out position with his hands with a gun. And as soon as I clear, he fires. Boom. And it was almost like at the shooting range where two things flip at the same time, and you got to shoot, no shoot. But I mean, they were like shoulder to shoulder. My mind's going, this ain't right. You know, something's off here. Because all the doors I've made entry in, I've never seen this. And so I hit this corner, and it goes boom. And as soon as the shot hit, I could feel the heat in my leg. And so I just returned fire. I got 4 rounds off. And it was like simultaneous. It's boom, 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 boom. And then I went back and went down on the side of the door and then reached around. And I think I got 2 more off around the corner of the door. And then I could really feel the blood in my leg. So I reached down and felt it, and my hand was full of blood. And I knew it had hit my femoral at that point.
Again, that was Louisville Police Sergeant Jonathan Mattingly. He is the sergeant who led that late-night raid in March, which resulted in Breonna Taylor being shot to death. He is giving his account of the series of events that led up to the shooting that night and how he felt. This is an interview done after that shooting months ago, and now, of course, we are learning more and more about what happened, the events that led up to her killing. Again, a new CNN analysis finding there were major missteps by police, failing to coordinate on all different levels here. Judge Mattingly, how do we sort of compare what we hear from the sergeant in that interview to, what sort of we're finding out after the fact, right? When we do investigations, in hindsight, what we are learning about what happened that night?
What's going to be critical is at each point, at each decision that was made, what was the information available to the officers, and then what information could have or should have been available to the officers if they had done things properly. And this review of their work is something that I think we need to do. And whenever you have a situation like the Breonna Taylor case, there has to be an independent review to see who knew what and when. Some of these officers might have gone in because they received the information from other officers ahead of them. And if there were miscalculations in there, then why was there miscalculations? How bad was it? And what can we do to make sure those miscalculations don't ever happen again?
Absolutely. And Judge, let me apologize. I called you Judge Mattingly. Obviously, I was referring to Sergeant Mattingly, whose interview we just heard, Judge Birmingham. Well, I want to switch topics to one other story that made headlines yesterday, and that is involving a man who spent 20 years behind bars for a murder that he says he did not commit. I'm talking about a man out of Camden County, Georgia, Dennis Perry. He was arrested in 2000. He was later convicted of murders that happened back in 1985. The murderers of Harold and Thelma Swain. They were shot inside their church, and Perry was arrested and charged in their murders some 15 years later. There were elements of racism involved in this case. Dennis Perry is white. The couple is black. Well, his convictions were overturned last week because of new evidence that linked a former suspect to the crime scene. Perry maintained his innocence all along. He finally walked out of that Camden County jail yesterday after a judge ruled his original conviction could be overturned. Let's take a look at that scene.
I told my wife I was going to pray myself out of here. And that's what I've done. Because I asked God for some help. And he sent me 12 disciples. 12 people from your law firm.
It means the world to me because I've made many a trip to this same parking lot to have to walk away and leave him in there. But today, I don't have to walk away without him. So it's the world. It's the world to me.
The Georgia Innocence Project involved in this case and getting Dennis Perry's conviction overturned. Now, we've seen a lot of cases like this where really there's been no physical evidence linking a defendant to the crime, yet the defendant is put away on the charges. In this case, Dennis Perry apparently agreed to not appeal to avoid the death penalty. This new evidence became apparent, however, after news reports and investigations found that another suspect who had originally been considered at the scene actually was a positive match for DNA. DNA found on a pair of eyeglasses found near the bodies. Now, that DNA had been tested back then. Technology is certainly not what it is today, but the DNA was not a match for Dennis Perry. Terri, many cases like this where we see, the facts just didn't match up, yet a suspect is convicted and sent to jail.
Yes, and it's so tragic. And that's why it's really great that we have these organizations like the Innocence Project that take on these cases that no one else can take on, and that they push to get these individuals out of jail. And this family, the Dennis Perry family and his wife, they seem like such humble people. And obviously they're praying that something happens, and it did finally happen. And I'm grateful that it did happen. We should have more cases where the DNA shows that it wasn't this individual and it was someone else. So hopefully there will be, justice here. They'll go after the right individual, and hopefully Dennis Perry and his family won't have to deal with this anymore in the future.
Yeah, I mean, Dennis Perry now free, but it's not over for him or his family yet, because prosecutors in Camden County have not agreed to completely drop the charges against him. I mean, there's still a chance that they may go ahead with a new trial. I mean, Judge Birmingham, what do you think are the chances of that? Now there's this strong evidence linking another suspect, but the prosecutors in this case were really reluctant to pull back on their initial claims leading up to his release. How do you see this playing out? It's not over for Mr. Perry.
Well, it's technically not over for Mr. Perry. I think this case illustrates so well why we need to never stop investigating and seeking the truth and justice in a particular case. And the DNA evidence certainly implicates somebody who was not the person convicted. He's out now. It's going through the process. They're investigating the person to whom that DNA does actually belong, and that's a very good thing. All of that happened, though, after he entered a plea of guilty. And there was a lot of fighting going on because he entered a plea of guilty that you shouldn't even test the evidence that might undo that plea or might cast doubt on that plea. And I think what we need to do is make sure that we never stop seeking the truth in these cases.
I mean, Terri, without knowing too much about the prosecutor's office there, as I said, obviously they were reluctant to backpedal at all on their, initial charges. They at least projected that they were confident they had the right man. I mean, do you think that at this point they will say, all right, you're free, it's over, we're not going to charge you again?
Well, I certainly hope so. I think that if, in fact, he was wrongfully imprisoned, which it does appear because there was no DNA of his at the scene, I think that, for the prosecution to try to stand their ground and to save face and still say that there's some reason here to go after Dennis Perry is, I think, not fair. And hopefully, to Judge Birmingham's point, the information will be pursued, justice will be pursued, and the right person will be convicted for this horrible crime.
I mean, we're 35 years out from this crime. It's certainly not unheard of to see trials this much later, but how difficult is it to prove someone committed a murder when we're 35 years out from the date of the crime, Judge?
Well, I've tried. My oldest one that I did when I was on the cold case unit was from 1981, which at the time was about 35 years. And memories fade. Documentation becomes absolutely vital and critical. Locating witnesses is difficult. However, you know the strength of your case before you ever have to go in front of a jury, or else you don't go in front of the jury. So yes, it presents unique challenges. However, it does sound like they do have biological evidence. That certainly is a good indicator against at least one person. That will definitely be presented and probably be the cornerstone of that case.
Well, certainly we wish Mr. Perry and his family well, and we do hope that they find the person who is truly responsible for the murder of this couple. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today on Law and Crime Report. Thank you to Terri Austin, law and crime analyst and trial attorney, and to Judge Brandon Birmingham. Be sure to stick with us. Our regular programming will continue, and we'll be back on Monday with the Law and Crime Report. Have a great weekend, and thanks for watching.